don't know where to put the lead now. I was going to make a joke about how lucky you were to have me again this week speaking to you, but they didn't seem very humble, so I won't do that. But in all honesty, when we preach on these topics, we are also preaching to ourselves. For me, I'm often not as humble as I should be. And if you ask my wife, I am not humble. Particularly when I get behind the wheel of a car for some reason, as many others, I'm sure. Or maybe not. But there are moments when I am not... I don't reflect the humility of Jesus. But my point is that Jesus comes and meets us where we are. Jesus takes us from where we are and moves us forward. Jesus doesn't wait for us to get to this ideal place of perfection or a relatively good place, and then he will start walking with us. He takes us where we are and goes with us. So wherever we are in this journey of humility, and I'm not wanting to guilt trip anybody, but where we are with humility, Jesus wants to help move us forward. One of the most inspiring people, I think, is Florence Nightingale. In the 1840s, she went on the Victorian Grand Tour of Europe with her family. She was from an upper middle class family. She was relatively well off, and they could do that sort of thing. And whilst traveling around Europe, she claimed to have, and there's no reason why we wouldn't believe her, but she claimed to have a divine experience where she heard from God and heard a message that she should go and serve. And it was in the early 1850s that the Crimean War broke out. And amongst the British soldiers, there was heavy casualties and losses. And in fact, 4,000 injured British soldiers died in the first winter. And Florence Nightingale, who was wanting to serve, went with 38 other nurses to the Crimea. And through her leadership, she improved sanitation, hygiene, and nutrition. And in fact, Florence Nightingale and others improved the mortality rate from injured soldiers from 42% down to just 2%. And in fact, herself, she got seriously ill serving. She was somebody who truly humbled herself and gave up for others. The word humble has its origins in the Latin word, and if you know Latin way better than me, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but it comes from the word humus, which means earth or soil. Humble is about going as low as possibly can. Those of you who've been to an Ash Wednesday service, when you get ash put in the sign of the cross on you, the person putting ash will say, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Turn away from sin and be faithful to Christ." There is a reminder in Lent and from Ash Wednesday onwards that we have our origins, that God created us from the dust of the earth, and one day we will return to that. The American pastor Rick Warren helpfully said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. I'll say that again. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. It's not self-effacing, necessarily, humility. It's not necessarily less self-esteem, but it is less self-promotion. In his new book, the new wine leader, Rich Johnson, says, true humility means willing to give up my rights and privileges in order to serve God, and is the true way to freedom. And what I want us to think about in Philippians 2 and in John 13 is that we are receivers of Jesus' humility and we are to be imitators of it. We receive Jesus's humility and we are to be imitators. And we'll see that Jesus shows us true greatness goes low. So we are receivers of Jesus' humility. Many of you will have seen the king's coronation a few years ago, and there's a moment in the coronation where the king has his robes of state stripped away in an act of humility. It's just meant to be him and God. It's a picture of how he, underneath those robes of state, is no different to the ordinary people. And he stands before God like that. He's demonstrating that he is just ordinary before God. And the king, it symbolically goes from here to here with the ordinary people. But Jesus was the one who went even further. He went from way up here and he took the lowest position of all right down here. And in Philippians 2, the second half of Philippians 2, verses 6 to 11, theologians believe that was an early Christian hymn that Paul is using or is slightly rearranged to make his point. We see in verse 6 that that Jesus is equal to God. He was on par with God. Jesus is God. But in verse 7 we see how he poured all of that out. And what is happening there, Jesus isn't giving up his divinity. He is completely divine. He is completely God, but he is also completely human. You can ask me about that later. My answer will probably be, I'm not quite sure. But it's something we believe. Jesus is fully God and fully human. There's a Greek word, kenosis, that means completely outpouring of himself. When we see Jesus go to the cross, we see him in the lowest position being crowned with a crown of thorns. In the lowest position, we see God giving everything for us. We see the importance of humility in Jesus. And verse 8 of Philippians 2 tells us that he humbled himself. He literally went to the earth. He went into the tomb. He went into the soil. But then in verse 9 to 11, we see that he didn't stay there. He went low so that he could go high. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. In verse 9 to 11, he is in the highest position of all. And Paul, who is writing this, this is completely countercultural to the view in the first century, and also countercultural to our view here. In the history of Paul, we see there is Alexander the Great, who by the age of 33 had conquered all of the known world. And he made a little suggestion to everybody that maybe I'm divine and that you should worship me. But then nearer to that, we have Caesar Augustus, who quelled the civil war in Rome after Julius Caesar's death and brought relative peace to the Roman Empire and was considered to be great, and also maybe suggested to everybody that he was divine and should be worshipped. The context was that to be great, everything needs to be going up and to the right. And Jesus is completely countercultural to this. We see the greatest example of this in John 13 in his foot washing. The greatest example, apart from the crucifixion, obviously, of humility. In verse 3 of John 13, it says that Jesus knew his time was coming to the end. As I mentioned last week, for those who are here, that John 13 to 20 is Jesus's last conversations and acts with his disciples before he goes up to be with his Father. These are the things that they really need to see, the things they really need to hear. And what he does is he gets down and he washes their feet. These are feet that had been on the road for 2 years. They were hard and callousy. The roads were dusty, and the exhaust gases from donkeys and camels are not the same as cars. They were walking through all of this, and Jesus got down and washed their feet. The ultimate picture of the Son of God, the Word made flesh, stooping down to the lowest position of all. And it's not like his disciples deserved it. They didn't deserve this honor from the Lord of heaven. They'd argued in front of Jesus about who was going to be the greatest. They'd sent away the children who came to Jesus, who Jesus said were the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. They would go on to abandon him. Peter would deny him, and Judas betrays him. But still, Jesus washes Judas's feet. He washes all of their feet. In Matthew 11, we see Jesus in his own words. He describes his character. He describes his very heart. He says in Matthew 11:29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." And here it is. He says, "For I am gentle and humble in heart." I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. That is the very character, the very heart of who Jesus is. And this isn't a one-off. This is one verse, albeit in 3,779 verses, in 89 chapters. But it's one verse where we see the very heart of who Jesus is. But it's backed up throughout his whole ministry. Often people look at Jesus turning over tables as an example, but that is a one-off. There's nothing else consistent within the life of Jesus for that. But Jesus says of himself, "I am gentle and humble." And his whole life backed that up. Jesus is humble, and he shows us true greatness goes low. So we are receivers of Jesus' humility, but we are to be imitators of it as well. Tom Wright says of the first 5 verses in Philippians this: challenge emerges from the very heart of the gospel itself. They are to perform the extraordinary feats, the they being Jesus' followers. They are to perform the extraordinary feat of looking at one another with the assumption that everyone else and their needs are more important than they themselves are. In verse 5 of Philippians 2, he said we are to have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, to view things in the same way that Jesus did. And then in verse 3 and 4, he says, rather in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but to each of you to the interest of others. And Jesus in John 13 washes the disciples' feet. And then he says in verse 15, this is an example I've left for you. Not that this is, oh, look, Jesus did a weird thing and washed our horrible, dirty feet. This was an example that they were to follow. And not only that, we get to verse 34 and 35 of John 13. And Jesus says, a new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. It flows from example to command. This is something we are called to do. This is something we are to take out and live. We may not be great at it at the moment, but Jesus wants to take us where we are and move us forward with it. And it's not always easy. The American author John Mark Comer says, we become like our image of God for better or worse. Sometimes we map our misplaced experiences and our misplaced views of authority onto Jesus, onto God. Sometimes We may have heard that God is angry God. We may have heard that God is a cosmic spoil sport. But when we look at Jesus, we see what God is like. And he is humble. Let that be your image of who Jesus is. He is humble. He's the source of humility. And he is our source. Let that be your source. My day off is a Friday, and there was one Friday where I was having a little lie-in, and my wife was taking the children to school. Her day off is Friday as well. And one of my... That did not come out well, did it? I take them to school as well. It was my turn. Let's reframe the story. But anyway, I was led in bed, and my youngest son came in, and he said, "Daddy, can you teach me football?" And my heart melted because I've got 3 boys, and the older 2 boys have literally no interest in football at all, and I love football, so I was over the moon with this. But when I go and play football with him in the garden or in the park, I do not kick the ball as hard as I can at him. When I play football with him, I don't do the best skill I can to get round him. That's not how you teach a child to get better. There's some really competitive people here I know going, yeah, that's exactly what you do. But I hold back. It's the same if you were playing tennis with a child. You don't do a cross-court winner or smash it down the line. You lower your skill to their level. You take things down to their level. You don't think of yourself above them. And that's what Jesus is calling us to do. He's calling us to be humble, to think less of ourselves and think more of others. The danger for us is pride. The opposite of humility is pride. Paul is writing the letter of Philippians from prison. He has fully embodied this idea of humility. He has given up reputation as an up-and-coming Pharisee and given up, I would imagine, considerable wealth to follow Jesus and to share his good news around the known world at that time. And pride is having that overinflated sense of our own greatness. Pride is putting ourselves in the place of God. The church father Augustine describes it as disordered love, loving things that are in themselves maybe okay to love, but loving them more than we love God. In Genesis 2, we see Adam and Eve grasp at the chance to be like God. We see in Genesis 11, the people in Babel building a tower that could reach to God. Pride is the oldest and maybe the most damaging of all sinful human urges. And we are encouraged to be prideful from every single direction. We are told to be self-reliant. Self-reliant to the point where we don't need God and we don't need others. I'm not saying don't ever be self-reliant, but I'm saying don't do it to the detriment of others and to our relationship with God. We live in a world of consumerism, where we are told that we deserve every single nice thing to make ourselves feel better. And we pay for things before we pray about things. And we live in a world of polarized ideology, and this is maybe where some of our bigger issues in the world have come from right now. Some of the ones that Helen was talking about earlier and Mark was praying about. Polarized ideology, we think that our ideas are better, and maybe even think we ourselves are better than someone else. And maybe even getting to the point where we know better and think we're better than God. But Philippians gives us the antidote to that. In verse 1, we are told to be united with Jesus. He is to be the object of our affection. We are to find him in his word. We are to find him in prayer. We are to talk with him and to listen to him. We're also in verse 1 to receive his love, to spend time in worship, just receiving from him, getting to know him better. And then lastly, in verse 1, we are to live in the power of his Spirit. We don't do this alone. He lives in us to live through us. I urge you to do whatever you can to feed on the love and the gentleness and the humility of Jesus. Because he shows us that true greatness goes low. So our challenge as we go out from here is to check our bearing. Our challenge is to check our bearing. I don't know how many people have been out hiking, but when you take a bearing, you put your compass. There's lines on a map that run north to south. You put your compass on the map north to south, and then you twist it in the direction you want to go, and then you follow that bearing. And it's okay when you can see around you. It's not too difficult. You maybe keep a stream on your left. You know you're going in the right direction. Or you can see a mound or a feature ahead of you in the countryside that you keep focused on. But sometimes life is harder than that, and you can't necessarily see what is ahead of you. If you're in a situation where the cloud is low, or in a winter situation where there's a whiteout, taking a bearing, knowing where you're heading, is hugely important. Because I can't remember it completely. I think if you're 1 degree out within, no, never mind. Basically, if you go in even 1 degree out, if you travel a mile 1 degree out, you're a long way from where you want to be. Just take that. Or don't do it. The mountain rescue teams in England and Wales in 2024 reported a 25% increase in call-outs where people have just blindly followed a GPS or their mobile phone and then walked off a precipice or got into huge difficulty because they didn't check their bearing, they didn't check where they were going, they didn't check their surroundings. So for us, we need to check our bearing. Where are we heading? Are we heading towards pride, or are we heading towards humility? Are we heading towards Jesus, or are we heading towards something that serves ourselves? In John 13, verse 12, Jesus says, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" I imagine him saying that with some urgency. Do you understand what I have done for you? After all, he knew his time was short with them. He gave all for you. He totally poured himself out for you. He humbled himself for you. He set an example and gave a command for you. And he calls you into the humility that he has. We receive his humility and we imitate his humility. We are to check our bearing. Where are we heading with this? And it's useful to constantly check to make sure we're on that right path, because in this world it is difficult. But Jesus shows us that true greatness goes low.